I am a mom of 5 currently. I have 2 biological children and 3 adopted through foster care. And I'm also the executive director of OK Foster Wishes. We're a nonprofit that serves kids in foster care and links the communities with different opportunities to get involved and really know these kids without breaking any confidentiality issues. So my family decided to get involved in foster care because we really wanted to help kids who were aging out of foster care, who actually we wanted to help familyless kids. And we found out there were resources for kids who age out of foster care without families. And so we just felt like if the community knew about this opportunity, they would jump in. We know Oklahomans and we know how giving and loving they are. And we know that we want to get around these, what I keep calling kids, and then I'm quickly reminded that they're young adults. And they're amazing young adults, because when kids are in foster care and they survive all the bouncing around and the challenges and obstacles they've faced, when they do are able to graduate high school or receive their GED, it's under such extreme circumstances that these are the survivors. About 50% of kids in foster care ever graduate high school. And out of that, less than 2% go on to finish college typically. And what I looked at when I was researching, trying to find help and getting the community involved, was I wanted to know why, because the resources are there. If you leave foster care without a permanent family, there's resources there to help pay for your college and get support and all that. But what they had a poverty of was relationship. And so to me, that was just, where we had really failed as a community getting around these kids. We had removed them from unsafe environments, but then we weren't there to follow through once we decided they were an adult. So there's been a lot of changes in Oklahoma. One of the really exciting ones is that they've recently extended health care, mental and physical health care for kids who age out of foster care up to the age of 26, which I think is great, because a lot of times you need that extra time to kind of get on your feet and get going and make your way in your future. But so we were wanting to help kids without families, and found these resources and started partnering with the community and a local church to just throw a graduation party. I thought, I can do that. That's a way I can get volunteers engaged. We can have them meet these youth that are aging out and get around them, invite them. As a kid, I had no one come to my graduation party, or my graduation ceremony, I'm sorry. And I know what that silent golf clap after having everybody else have their families, rally and get excited. I know what that feeling is. And so I didn't want that for any of these youth. So we strategically created a graduation party and invited the community and volunteers to come in, and we had little invitation cards so that if a youth made a natural connection with a volunteer, we did some icebreaker games that were kind of silly, but it worked out. Everybody had a good time. And I think the first year we did the, what was that? There was some dance that was really popular, and people were like, would jump up and act crazy and whatever. And so they did that. Anyway, it was really funny and a lot of fun, good time. We had food donated and prizes for the youth, and that was the other thing. Sometimes people could volunteer because they wanted to engage with youth. Other people maybe were not so comfortable with that, but there were other ways to help. So maybe you aren't comfortable coming and volunteering, but hey, why don't you get a gift card, or we had someone donate a laptop one year. We've had TVs and Wii's when they were cool donated. Now it's, I guess, Xbox. But anyway, it's always changing. But there's lots of ways people can get involved. So we tried to get the community involved with whatever way they felt comfortable. And it was a great event. We reached out to, it was just Oklahoma City area for the first year. Now we hold one annually, and last year we had almost 40 youth attend, and got them connected with different resources in the community and opportunities, and we're able to love on them and tell them, man, you're awesome, you are the overcomers. You're the half that made it. And so can you imagine how bright your future is going to be? And it was just really exciting, and it's great to hear about. We started asking the youth to fill out profiles, and almost all of them are in ROTC, or one kid was going to, he had gotten a scholarship at the Chicago Philharmonic and was going to some school in Chicago, and had this great scholarship, and just really talented, extraordinary youth. And that's not the typical story you hear about kids in foster care. You hear about the ones in trouble that don't want a family, that aren't connected. And I just really want people to know that other side, that there's a lot of kids out there that are doing the right thing and making the right choices, and they're just in a bad spot, and those are the ones that we need to be there for. So the graduation party was kind of our way to do that. I had a friend who was partnering with DHS and he was a pastor at a church, and working with DHS to get Christmas wish lists filled for kids in rural counties. There's a lot of support, or a lot more support in the metro area, with different businesses and ways to get around kids in foster care and support them. But in the rural areas, a lot of times it's the families and churches and community. And so he was really excited to get his church involved. And the cool thing about the Christmas wish list is that you really see the personality of a child, because kids are in foster care usually for abuse and neglect. Typically there are confidentiality issues because they're minors, and so you have to really honor that, and they're there for a reason, and that's, there's safety issues, and so we want to honor and respect that. But at the same time, we want people to see these great kids and identify with them, and it not just be a nameless, faceless kid that the government's supposed to take care of, but a child in our community that's just like our kid. And so we worked with DHS, or he worked with DHS, and created these lists for Christmas and distributed them to his church. And then people would go and they'd actually shop for that child, and it showed their first name and 2 Christmas wishes. And so you got to see a little bit of personality. And all of a sudden it wasn't a nameless, faceless kid. It was Sarah, who's 8 and loves Dora. And a lot of people could really relate, and it pulled at their heartstrings. And eventually the 2 efforts merged, and he asked me to found it, and I built a board, and we became OK Foster Wishes, and have continued to have other efforts to serve kids in the state of Oklahoma. But at our very first graduation party, a little bit of my personal story is that in planning for it, it was really difficult to find the youth at the very first graduation party. No one had done this before, and so the youth and caseworkers didn't know to look for it, so we were really pursuing them. And when you go to try to find kids who are aging out of foster care, when they're graduating high school, typically, because of the multiple moves that they've had to make and the difficult circumstances, they're not 17 and 18 graduating high school. They're 18, 19, 20, sometimes graduating high school and receiving their GED. And so to track those youth down was a little bit more difficult, but it got me to engage with caseworkers, which we have some of the most amazing caseworkers in Oklahoma. We have people that this isn't just a job to them. Those are all their kids. They never stop thinking about them. They do everything they can to advocate for them, and it's just really honorable. I wish we did more to celebrate caseworkers in Oklahoma, but thankfully they're doing it for their own reasons, and they care about the kids and have great hearts for it. But there was this one caseworker, and she came to the meeting, and she was tiny, 90 pounds, soaking wet, and just mean as the day is long. Nobody messed with her. She's very serious, and she was just a wreck. And we all just kind of looked at her and thought, why is she so upset? And so we had our meeting, and she was like, just have your meeting, don't worry about it. She's very businesslike. She's the get it done girl. And when we were finished, we went over and asked her, what's going on? And she said, well, there's this baby, and she'd been abandoned in the NICU after 2 days old. The mother was afraid of getting arrested and had abandoned her. She'd been drug exposed, and her heart had never fully formed, and she was born with half of a heart and then other multiple malformations, and was in need of a heart transplant. And she'd been living in the NICU for 28 days, but after 28 days, the NICU can no longer keep you. You either have to get moved to the floor or admitted to the hospital or go home. And the hospital wouldn't accept her because there was no therapy they could administer her, and they don't just house children to pass away. And so they found another a children's facility that's a hospital, gives hospital-like care, called Bethany Children's Center, and she had just moved her that day. And she said, you know, I've gone up and seen that baby almost every day on my lunch hour, and I would go up and talk to her, and she'd wriggle her little hand out and reach out and hold my finger, and, you know, I'd talk to her and then say, okay, baby, I have to go, you know. And when the baby was born, she was like 3 pounds, and now she'd gotten up to a little over 4 pounds, but she was still not doing well. And she said, we moved her to Bethany Children's Center to pass away, and they, because they were unable to find a family for her. And I was like, what are you talking about? She said, and they won't put her on the list for organ transplant because you have to have a family that agrees to care for the organ post-op. And so that is a whole, probably another story, but to receive an organ, you have to be financially, socially, and medically eligible. And she was certainly medically eligible. She was financially eligible because the state had made a commitment to this abandoned child to pay for her medical care. But she was not socially eligible because her mother's rights had not been terminated, and so because of that, the organ board was not able to, they have to evaluate the caregiver, and so they were unable to find a caregiver to evaluate. So they moved her to Bethany Children's Center, and we found out about her, and I went home and talked with my family, and I just thought, you know, this is America, like this can't happen, you can't. But they had called every foster family in Oklahoma, and you had to agree to live in St. Louis for 4 to 6 months to wait on an organ, because that was the closest area to be for organ donation, and a human heart will only last 4 hours outside of a human body, so you have to be physically there and waiting so that when the organ comes available that you're ready and prepped, and they bring the heart to you and get it all done. So we talked about it, and we have 2 biological kids that at the time were 10 and 12 years old, and we'd done a lot of like inner city kind of mission work with our church, and really tried to instill giving and serving in our community to our children, and talked to them about it. And we decided as a family that even if it meant that she came home and passed away, even if she didn't get the organ, like we still wanted to be that family for her, that she should have a family that loves her for however long God sees fit. That's not up to us. We're not saving her. We're just providing a home and a safe place for her, whatever her journey is. And so it was kind of like if other people were going to say no, we were going to say yes. And so I went to the caseworker the next day. There was a conference for kids aging out of foster care, and I ran into her and I said, hey, I talked to my family, and if they'll let us, I mean, I know we're not foster parents, but we'll take the baby. I'll move to St. Louis for the summer or however long, and like we'll make it work. We'll bring her home. And she just looked at me like I was crazy. And she said, are you serious? And I said, yeah, but we're not foster parents, and it's quite a process to become a foster parent and be approved and all that. And so because of the unique situation in the child's health, and because we had been cleared to work with kids in foster care through a volunteer program, which we did with the graduation party, she said, I tell you what, if you go visit her in the hospital, we'll work something out. Let me talk to my team. And on Monday, they told us we were approved. Tuesday, someone came and walked through the home. Wednesday, we went to go meet her, and all we knew, it was a little girl in the hospital who needed a heart transplant. And so we go, and she was right at 5 pounds and just was the tiniest little thing. And I remember just the fear that welled up in me when I held her and thought, what are we doing? Like, are we going to be enough? Can we do this for this kid? Are we the wrong are we standing in the way of somebody that's supposed to be doing this? And then I just felt like, I really prayed about it and was like, God, if this is not supposed to happen, please shut this door. And there's every reason it shouldn't have happened, because we weren't approved foster parents, and it's very difficult, and the whole process is just, you don't find out about a kid and then have them placed in your home. It just doesn't work that way. So we moved forward, just kept moving forward with the next step, and they signed us up for classes. We brought the baby home that next, I think we had to get equipment. Some of her oxygen monitoring equipment wasn't ready, so they had to keep her over the weekend, and we brought our biological kids up to meet her and hold her, and we have some cute pictures of that. And then that following Monday, we brought her home. And so we brought home this baby. She eventually stopped eating. When you are in heart failure, your body's unable to handle the added volume and work on your body, so you stop eating. And so eventually she was unable to eat, and they were going to have to put me inpatient to teach me how to do a NG, or a tube through her nose, and it goes down into her stomach. And there's risk of aspiration because you have to pass the lungs and all that. So they were going to keep me overnight and train me how to tube feed her. And they were working with the caseworkers, and the medical team here in Oklahoma was working with St. Louis Children's Hospital. And they agreed to let us come up and for us to be evaluated to possibly list her on the heart transplant list. And so we're really excited and got up there, and we're like, if they say yes, we're staying. I'm just going to stay. And so they medically flew her up there in a little plastic Michael Jackson box, what I call it, but that little oxygen chamber, because she was so fragile. And then I met her on a commercial flight. I took a commercial flight. The caseworker came and drove me to the airport, and I met her there, and I lived there for the summer. And when kids are in foster care, they're not allowed to be left alone in the hospital. And so because I was out of state and living in the hospital, well, actually I jumped ahead of my story a little bit, I'm sorry. She stopped eating, and we went to St. Louis for the evaluation. And then once we were there, they did the tests and took pressures of her heart and pictures of her heart and did a full evaluation and said, yes, she was definitely medically eligible to be listed as an organ recipient. And financially, they worked things out with the state of Oklahoma. That was going to be taken care of. And then they did like a 2.5-hour psych eval on me, called and had my husband evaluated in Oklahoma, and we had to send in letters of reference that, no, we're not crazy. We don't know what we are, but we're not crazy. But basically, and they approved us as caregivers for the organ post-op. And so we felt like, oh my gosh, that's it. She's going to be listed. We were really excited. And the next day I woke up, and the head of the transplant team, Dr. Canner, came in. And it was one of the very few times that he will ever come in the room. He is incredibly smart, brilliant, but doesn't enjoy the social part of medicine. So he kind of stays out in the hallway and works with numbers and medical things, but doesn't have so much contact. And he came in and sat down next to me on the bed, and he said, well, we've got a plane ticket and we're sending you home. And I said, no, I'm here, and we got approved, like everything's good, we're supposed to be listed. And he was really upset, and he said, you talked to DHS, and they're not terminating on that mother, and the mother had gotten picked up for some things, and when she went through detox, then she decided that she wanted to fight for her baby. And so now she's back in the game, and she's not a non-issue anymore, and so they had to deny us because of social eligibility. And so they packed us up and sent me to the airport, and the airplane almost wouldn't let me on. And they had to call the hospital, and the hospital's like, there's no way. This lady has like a 5-pound baby in a car seat with an oxygen monitor and a feeding tube, and she's got a backpack on her with food in it, with liquid, and this kid's got wires and tubes running all over them. They're not getting on our plane. And the doctor said, basically like, let her go home, because if the child dies, even if the child dies in the air, the child's gonna die. We're not gonna list it. So they kind of signed off on the liability to the airport, or to the airline, and they let us go home. And God, I forgot about that part. I always cry when I tell this story. So we got home, and we had to go right to the hospital that night. We tried to spend one night at home, and by the morning she went into heart failure, and her oxygen dropped to 24%. The ambulance came, and we were hitting it. Went by ambulance to OU Children's, and I lived there with her for 5 weeks. And the state was working really hard with the mother, trying to get her to, agree to do what's best for the child, and working with the organ board to say, okay, we'll send the mom up there. Well, the organ board's like, well, we can tell you with her record and, pretty recent history with drug abuse, we're not going to approve her. So everyone kind of had their line in the sand, and the state of Oklahoma is in a bad situation. It's easy in foster care to point fingers and vilify. So many times what's publicly known, the people who really know what's going on usually can't defend themselves because they're the ones that know the confidential stuff. And so many times I see it over and over where DHS or foster parents, the people who really know what's going on, have to just be quiet and smile and take people's abuse or judgment of, because they are privy to things that other people don't know, and they don't need to know because it would violate that child's confidentiality. So they put the child's welfare above defending themselves, and that's one thing I really wish people would know more about. Is sometimes, when you see one side of the story, just always know there's at least one more side, and a lot of times 2 or 3. But so the state of Oklahoma was trying to do the right thing. We don't want it to be easy to terminate parents' rights. I mean, being a parent is a right of ours, and it shouldn't be easy to take people's children away. And so they have to go through due diligence, and everyone deserves a right to get their act together and to try to be a parent and do the right thing. And so the state of Oklahoma is bound to offer her those same rights. Now, at some point, they went to her, and as a mother, they told her, yes, this is within your right to fight for her, but we can't get a jury trial till almost August. And at this point, there's no way the baby would have lived that long. And so she came in to visit me a couple times when I was staying with the baby, and the last time she came in, and she tried to shock me with some of her situation and different things. And then when she saw that I wasn't going to budge, and that I cared about her too, because when do we stop caring about the mother? When she turns 18, then all of a sudden we don't care about them? I mean, when is it? She was a kid in foster care who grew up in foster care, and now she's having children born into foster care. And so my heart breaks for her just like it does all these kids. And so she talked to the baby for a little bit, and she said, are you going to stay with her? Are you going to take care of her? And I said, yeah, I will. And she went to, she talked to the attorneys, and she said, I'll do it. I'll relinquish my rights, but I want that lady to be in there when I do it. And so we had to go to court, and we went to court, and we'd found out later that the state had made an agreement with St. Louis Children's that we had to have an adoption, be authorized for adoption, so that the child would definitely be placed with us if she survived the surgery, and because we were approved as caregivers for the organ post-op by St. Louis. So everyone kind of had their line in the sand. The state of Oklahoma can't terminate a parent's rights without everyone has a right to a trial, and they couldn't get a trial for her until August. And then the organ board has to be responsible to families that are donating organs and say, we're going to be a good steward of your loved one's organs. And so they have to have these checks. You have to be socially, financially, and medically eligible to receive an organ. And so everyone kind of had their line in the sand, and thankfully we were able to be that bridge that brought it together and gave her that opportunity to receive an organ. But we were at the relinquishment, and it's the exact opposite. As beautiful as a wedding is, where two people come together and they love each other and they talk about bringing their families together and sharing their lives together, and what they're going to look like in their future, how their future is now forever changed because they're together and going to make decisions together. A relinquishment is the exact opposite, and just the most sterile and hurtful thing to have to listening to a parent. The state has to ask certain questions so that it's legally binding, and they are the most heart-wrenching statements. And I can't imagine the strength of that mother to be able to say that. But publicly they had to ask her, so are you saying that you are unable or unwilling to care for your child? And for a mother that I know loves her child to have to say, yes, I'm unwilling or unable to care for my child, and make that public statement. Then they went on to say, and no one's promised you anything in exchange for this. And, just what a slap in the face that must have felt like to her. Here she's just humbling herself to give her daughter a chance at life, because and having to face the fact that she knows she can't give that chance to her daughter. It was awful. It was an awful thing and I'm standing there sobbing, my husband's sobbing, and that little tiny girl, her mother, was just a stone. And she said all those statements, and she looked at me, and she walked out of the courtroom. And we have not seen her since. But we had to make, then the state turned to us and said, okay, we need FICE, we need you guys to agree. Are you willing to adopt this child? And we're like, whoa, wait a minute. We thought we were bringing home a baby to get a heart transplant and somebody else might adopt her. And this was kind of one of the first times that we really realized that they needed us, because the Oregon board needed us to make a 3 to 5 year commitment post-transplant. And the state said, if you're going to commit to 3 to 5 years, we need you to commit to adoption. We need you to commit to forever. And that just brings up, that's a huge commitment. Forever is forever. And so all of a sudden we just really had to trust and lean that this shouldn't have happened. It should have fell through so many times. But here we were in this position to help this little girl, and for our family to be able to step in and help someone. And we were honored to do it. So we said yes. They came and got her. The caseworker, actually, I left from the courthouse. The caseworker took me to the airport, and I flew a commercial flight to St. Louis, and they were at the hospital prepping the baby and put her in that little Michael Jackson plastic box, the oxygen chamber, and they flew her, transported her. We actually arrived almost at the same time. I was in the waiting area of the cardiac ICU, and they wheeled my baby by, and I was like, hold on, that's my baby. And I didn't realize, but so I had spent the 5 weeks at OU Children's Hospital, and thankfully we had friends and family around us that were able to love on us and support us, and we actually had a schedule, and I would stay with the baby. I would be there at 9 o'clock at night, and then during the day I would stay with the baby, and then about 5 o'clock somebody would get off of work somewhere and come to the hospital and sit with the baby so that I could go home and have dinner with my 2 biological kids and my husband, and have that nighttime routine and spend that time together with them and tuck them in bed. And then at 9 o'clock I'd drive back to the hospital and spend the night and the next day with her. And that really got us through that time. 5 weeks is a long time to be living like that. And when kids are in foster care, you're not legally allowed to leave them alone in a room, even at a hospital. They're to be with an adult at all times and an approved caregiver. And so I couldn't leave the room. So unless somebody brought me something to eat, I was eating hospital food. And unless I had, if she went to a procedure or something, then that was the only time. If they took her for a procedure or had to do something to her, then I could run down to the gift shop. It was like my big outing. And it was the same thing once we got transported to St. Louis Children's. I lived there, and it's about 7 hours from St. Louis to Oklahoma City, and my husband would drive up every weekend with the big kids, and he would take over on Saturday morning, and I'd go stay with my big kids at a Ronald McDonald type of medical hospital hotel place, and we'd run around St. Louis, and then Sunday morning I'd come back and I'd relieve him, and we'd give each other a kiss and say goodbye, and we did that all summer. And then July 30th we got a call for an offer of a heart. I'm not gonna cry. And And well, the night before, actually, I have to back up because just for you to understand the weight of the burden on our family, and just we were all kind of at our wits' end. The baby was struggling. Her heart rate was up to 180. We had the doctor spent the night before we received the call. He spent the night at the foot of her bed with his hands in his head, or his head in his hands, and just like, she's not going to make it. I've done everything I can. She's just not going to make it. She's not going to make it. And I'm like, hey, I'm sitting right over here. I can completely hear you. Please stop talking like that. And he just couldn't believe how strong she was, and what a fighter she was, and how she got through it. And that night, I've been accused of being a control freak, and it makes me a great mom of a kid with a medical illness, because I'm really good at charting their meds and making sure everybody's okay and all that. But it can also consume you. And when you live in a little hospital room all summer, I had all these little charts, and I had, how much she was gaining, how many, kilograms per day, and if we multiply it by this, and they'd showed me the organ harvesting charts, which are taking off the child death rates. And when you look at, so I was calculating it all, and if we could just get her up to this one, if we could just get her up to 9 pounds, that she'd be compatible with an 18-pound, and it was the summer, and there's toddlers that fall in the pool. And then I start hearing what I'm thinking. And I think about the family that's going to lose their child so that my child will live. And so that night, I prayed for that family that would lose their child. And I prayed for my family because we were really struggling. My kids wanted me home. And then I told God, I'm not going to count it anymore. I'm not going to calculate it. I put all my charts away, and I just told him, I was like, I trust you, and this is your story to write. I just get to be a part of it. So I put all that away. And the next morning, it was about 5 a.m., and a nurse I'd never seen before, which at this point we know kind of all the nurses. In fact, we're still friends with them on Facebook. One of them came in, and she leaned over and called me Mrs. So-and-so, which was the baby's biological mother's last name. It's 5 a.m. I'm not really sure. I think I had drool on the pillow. I don't know. I'm looking at this woman, and she's like, we have a call for you. You need to come out to the nurse's station. I'm like, okay. And I walk out, and they're like, hello, this is so-and-so from the transplant team. We've called to tell you we've received an offer of a heart. And I think I almost passed out, but I don't remember most of it, so I'm not really sure. But what I do remember is having a feeling of wanting to scream because I was so excited. And when I did, I looked up, and because we're in the cardiac ICU, they require the lights to be on 24 hours a day so that they can administer emergency medical attention at any time. And the nurse's station was in the center, and there's all these rooms around. And I look up, and I know all these babies are waiting for hearts. And we got the call. We got the heart. And so I see these mothers and dads, leaning over their babies and holding their kids and doing different things. And then my heart sank again, And so they had to take the baby right away to do some more testing for pictures and for comparison of this possible match, and make sure that the size was going to be compatible and all that. And it ended up being a little bit too big, but they were able to close her chest wall, which we were thrilled, because I don't know if I could have took that. But and I called my husband and told him, I said, okay, they said, they've got a match, but they said not to get too excited, because a lot of times, they haven't physically put their eyes on it. They have to send a team there. The team evaluates the organ. Then they have to harvest all the other organs first. Then they harvest the heart. So at any time, it could be a deal breaker, but we have to go ahead and move forward like it's going to happen. So the whole day is just this on pins and needles. Okay, we're going to do this next step, but it may not work out. Don't get your hopes up. And they had, the night before when she was so sick, they had let me hold her because they were going to put her into medical coma an intubator to wait on the organ because she just was struggling too much. And so they were letting me hold her because they said once we do that, you can't hold her if she's on the vent. And so I got to hold her, and then when we were prepping for the surgery, they let me hold her one more time, and they were like, okay, once we bathe her, like, you can't touch her because she'll be all sterile and all this. So we just kept moving forward. And then that night, they told me, I went into the surgery center waiting, and of course there's no one there because it's the middle of the night. And they said, listen for the helicopter. And which I still, to this day, I don't know if it's PTSD or what, but if I hear a helicopter, I just start bawling. But I see the helicopter, or I can hear it thump, 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 thump. And they said, when you hear that, watch the elevators out here, and you'll see a red cooler go down the hallway, and that's your daughter's heart. And so I heard the helicopters, and here comes the elevator doors, and the guys walk out with a little red cooler, and it's just like, it was the most amazing thing. A couple hours later, they came out and said, she's going to be okay. And they actually had to extubate her early because she'd never felt that good in her whole life. She's been sick her whole life. She was born with a half a heart with multiple malformations. And so for her to get a new working, functioning heart, it's like an immediate fix. And so they had her strapped down and intubated, and she was trying to talk and move around. And so they extubated her earlier. They're like, we have never had a kid recover this fast. This is incredible. And so thus the name Mighty Mia, and it's just kind of stuck. She's just been, we continued our foster care journey with her, and we were able to help another child who needed, who's a heart baby, and he has his own journey. And but Mighty Mia has changed our life, and she pretty much changes everybody's life she meets. So now I'll cry again. But anyway, so she's doing great. She's now 5 years old and starting kindergarten this year. So we have some challenges with behavior from drug exposure and some challenges from the medication, but each day is a gift, and each day is something we're thankful for. So that's our Mighty Mia story.